In 1852, a Southern widow invited a slave into her home and rewrote her bloodline. The year was 1852, and the air in rural Virginia hung heavy with the scent of blooming magnolias and freshly turned earth. Willow Creek plantation sprawled across hundreds of acres along the James River, its fields a patchwork of vibrant green tobacco leaves swaying gently in the late spring breeze. The grand white column mansion stood proudly at the center, a symbol of Southern prosperity built on the toil of over 100 souls held in bondage. Eleanor Hargrove, a widow of 35, gazed out from the wide veranda of her home. Her husband, Captain Nathaniel Hargrove, had perished 2 years earlier in a sudden fever that swept through the region like a merciless storm. He had been a stern but fair planter, leaving behind a thriving estate and their only son, Thomas, now 22 and home from his studies in Richmond. Eleanor was a woman of refined beauty, fair skin, auburn hair pinned elegantly, and eyes the color of stormy skies. Yet beneath her composed exterior lay a profound loneliness, a void that no amount of social calls from neighboring planters' wives could fill. The plantation ran smoothly under the watchful eye of the overseer, Mr. Harlan Graves, a rough man in his 40s with a reputation for firmness. But it was the enslaved people who truly kept Willow Creek alive. Men and women rising before dawn to tend the crops, cook the meals, and care for the livestock. Among them was Josiah, a tall, strong man of 28, with skin like polished ebony and eyes that held a quiet depth. Born on the plantation, Josiah had been trained as a blacksmith, his skilled hands forging tools and horseshoes that were the envy of nearby farms. He lived in the quarters down the hill with his elderly mother, Mama Ruth, who had served as a cook in the big house for decades. One sweltering afternoon in May, as thunder rumbled in the distance, Eleanor rode out on her mare to inspect a distant field. A sudden downpour caught her unawares, turning the dirt paths to mud. Her horse slipped, throwing her to the ground with a painful twist to her ankle. She cried out, alone and stranded, the rain soaking her riding habit. It was Josiah who found her. He had been repairing a fence nearby when he heard the commotion. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his powerful arms and carried her through the storm to a nearby abandoned overseer's cabin, long unused and sheltered by ancient oaks. "Ma'am, you all right?" he asked, his voice deep and steady as he set her gently on a dusty bench inside. Eleanor's heart raced, not just from the fall, but from the forbidden closeness. No white woman of her station should ever be alone with an enslaved man, let alone touched by one. Yet in that moment, gratitude overrode propriety. I think my ankle is sprained," she managed, wincing. "Thank you for helping me." Josiah nodded respectfully, keeping his eyes lowered. "I'll fetch help from the house, Ms. Eleanor." But as he turned to leave, lightning cracked overhead, and the rain intensified. The path back would be treacherous. "Best wait it out here," he said softly. "Storm will pass soon." They sat in awkward silence at first, the only sounds the patter of rain on the tin roof and the occasional rumble of thunder. Eleanor studied him covertly, the way his broad shoulders filled the doorway, the quiet strength in his posture. She had seen him many times from afar, but never like this. "You've been on Willow Creek all your life?" she asked, breaking the quiet. "Yes'm. Born here. My mama too." "And your father?" Josiah hesitated. "Never knew him, ma'am. Mama says he was sold away when I was a babe." Eleanor's heart ached with an unfamiliar sympathy. Nathaniel had never been cruel. He provided decent quarters and rations, but the system was unyielding. People were bought and sold like cattle. As the storm eased, Josiah fashioned a makeshift crutch from a branch and helped her back to the mansion. Mr. Graves eyed them suspiciously upon their arrival, but said nothing when Eleanor explained the accident. That evening, as her maid tended her swollen ankle, Eleanor couldn't shake the memory of Josiah's gentle strength. It was improper, dangerous even, to dwell on it. Yet in the quiet of her bedroom, she felt a spark of something long dormant, curiosity, perhaps even warmth. The next day, Eleanor summoned Mama Ruth to the big house under the pretense of discussing kitchen matters. But her true intent was to learn more about Josiah. "He's a good boy," Mama Ruth said proudly, her wrinkled hands kneading dough. Strong, smart, reads a bit when he can, taught himself from old newspapers. Eleanor was surprised. Literacy among the enslaved was forbidden, punishable by severe measures. He reads. Mama Ruth glanced around cautiously. Yes'm. Keeps it hidden. Dreams of freedom one day, though he knows it's far off. Over the following weeks, Eleanor's ankle healed, but her thoughts lingered on Josiah. She began assigning him tasks closer to the house, repairing the veranda railing, shoeing the horses in the stable yard where she could watch from her window. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Eleanor walked to the stables alone. Josiah was there, hammering a shoe into place. Thank you again for that day, she said softly, approaching. He straightened, wiping sweat from his brow. Just doing what was right, ma'am. Please call me Eleanor when we're alone. His eyes widened. That ain't proper, ma'am. Perhaps not, she whispered, stepping closer. But in this moment, it feels right. Their eyes met, and in that shared gaze, something unspoken passed between them, a connection defying the iron chains of society. Meanwhile, young Thomas Hargrove had returned fully from Richmond, eager to take his place as heir. He was handsome, with his father's sharp features and a charm that turned heads at social gatherings. But Thomas carried secrets of his own, gambling debts from card games in the city, and a restlessness that chafed against plantation life. He noticed his mother's distracted air, her frequent glances toward the stables. Mother, you seem preoccupied, he remarked one dinner. Just the burdens of running the place, she replied smoothly. But whispers began to stir among the house staff. A young enslaved girl named Layla, who served as Eleanor's personal maid, overheard conversations and saw the lingering looks. As summer deepened, Eleanor found excuses to speak with Josiah about the crops, the weather, anything to hear his voice. He shared stories of his mother's songs from Africa, tales passed down through generations. She confided her loneliness, the weight of widowhood. One moonlit night, unable to sleep, Eleanor wandered to the garden. Josiah was there, drawing water from the well. I couldn't stay away, she admitted, her voice trembling. Nor I, he replied, his hand brushing hers as he handed her a dipper of cool water. In that instant, under the stars, their lips met in a tentative, forbidden kiss. The world around them, the plantation, the laws, the dangers, faded. But secrets like this could not stay hidden forever. Little did they know, Layla had followed her mistress and witnessed the embrace from the shadows. Shocked, the girl fled back to the quarters, her mind racing with what she had seen. And so, in the heart of Willow Creek, a flame ignited that would burn through lives and legacies, threatening to consume everything in its path. Summer draped Willow Creek in a thick, humid embrace. Cicadas sang endlessly in the oaks, and the tobacco fields shimmered under the relentless sun. Days passed slowly for most, but for Eleanor Hargrove, time had taken on a secret rhythm, moments stolen, glances exchanged, touches that lingered just long enough to set her heart racing. After that first kiss in the garden, Eleanor and Josiah became careful conspirators in their own longing. They met only when the house slept and the moon hung low. In the old smokehouse behind the kitchen, beneath the willow tree by the creek, or in the abandoned cabin where he had once carried her through the storm. Each meeting was brief, fraught with danger, yet filled with a tenderness neither had known before. One such night in late June, Eleanor slipped from the big house in a simple cotton dress, her hair loose down her back instead of pinned in its usual elegant style. She carried a small lantern, its flame low, and made her way to the creek. Josiah was already there, seated on a fallen log, his silhouette strong against the silver water. I feared you might not come, he said softly as she approached, rising to meet her. How could I stay away? She whispered, setting the lantern down. She stepped into his arms as naturally as breathing. His hands, callous from the forge, rested gently at her waist. They kissed slowly, deeply, as though each touch might be the last. They spoke in hushed voices of dreams neither dared voice in daylight. Eleanor told him of books she had read in secret, tales of far-off lands where people were free to love whom they chose. Josiah shared fragments of songs his mother sang, melodies brought across the ocean by ancestors he would never know. He spoke, too, of a quiet hope that one day the world might change, though he knew the price of such thoughts. "You make me feel alive again," Eleanor confessed one evening, her head resting against his chest as they sat hidden in the tall grass near the river. "Since Nathaniel passed, everything has been gray. You bring color back." Josiah stroked her hair gently. "And you, Miss Eleanor, you make me feel like a man, not just property. When I'm with you, I forget the weight of these chains." But even as their love deepened, danger circled closer. Layla, the young maid who had witnessed that first kiss, wrestled with what she had seen. At 16, Layla was bright and observant, with warm brown eyes and a quick smile that endeared her to the other house servants. She had always admired Mistress Eleanor, kind where many planters' wives were harsh, fair in her treatment of those who served her. But this was beyond understanding. A white widow and an enslaved man? If word reached Mr. Graves, or worse, young Master Thomas, Josiah would be whipped or sold away, maybe even killed. Layla confided in no one at first, but the secret weighed heavy. One afternoon, while brushing Eleanor's hair in the bedchamber, she hesitated. "Miss Eleanor," she began cautiously, "is everything all right?" Eleanor met her eyes in the mirror, sensing the girl's unease. "Of course, Layla. Why do you ask?" Layla's hands trembled slightly. I worry for you, ma'am. Folks talk, you know." Eleanor's heart skipped. "What do folks say?" "Nothing specific," Layla lied, looking down. "Just that you seem different lately. Happier, maybe." Eleanor forced a smile. "Perhaps I am. The summer air agrees with me." But after that, Eleanor grew more cautious. She limited her assignments that brought Josiah near the house, relying instead on notes slipped into his toolbox or hidden beneath a certain stone by the creek, brief messages of longing, signed only with a pressed violet. Meanwhile, Thomas Hargrove's restlessness grew. His gambling debts in Richmond had mounted higher than he cared to admit, and creditors were beginning to send letters. He spent evenings on the veranda with a glass of bourbon, watching the quarters with a critical eye, calculating how he might increase yields to cover his losses. He noticed his mother's changed demeanor, her softer smiles, her occasional distracted gaze, and it unsettled him. One Sunday after church, as the family dined with neighboring planters, Thomas overheard gossip. Old Mrs. Whitlock leaned toward his mother with a knowing look. "My dear Eleanor, you've a glow about you these days. One might almost think there's a suitor calling." The table laughed politely, but Eleanor flushed. "Nonsense, Margaret. I'm far too busy managing Willow Creek for such foolishness." Thomas watched her closely that evening. Later, as he passed her sitting room, he saw her at her writing desk, quickly folding a small paper and tucking it into her pocket. Curiosity and suspicion took root. In the quarters, Mama Ruth sensed a shift in her son. Josiah returned from his work quieter, his eyes distant yet brighter. She feared for him. "Boy, what's in your heart?" she asked one night as they sat outside their cabin, fireflies dancing around them. Josiah hesitated, then spoke truthfully. "Mama, I've fallen in love. Deep as the river." Mama Ruth's face tightened. "With who?" He told her everything. Tears filled her eyes, not of joy, but of terror. "Lord have mercy, Josiah. You know what they do to men who even look too long at a white woman. And the mistress. She'll be ruined. Both of you lost. I know the danger, Mama. But when I'm with her, it don't feel wrong. It feels like the only right thing in this world." Mama Ruth grasped his hand. "Love don't change laws, child. It don't stop whips or ropes. Promise me you'll be careful." He promised, but his heart pulled him back to Eleanor all the same. As July ripened into August, the stolen meetings grew bolder. One night, thunder rumbled again, and rain drove them into the old cabin. There, sheltered from the storm and the world, their love crossed a final boundary. They gave themselves to each other completely, whispering promises they knew might never be kept. Afterward, lying in each other's arms on a bed of old blankets, Eleanor traced the scars on Josiah's back, marks from a long-ago punishment for a minor infraction. "I wish I could take these away," she murmured. "You already have," he replied, kissing her forehead. "In here." He touched his chest. "I'm free when I'm with you." But freedom was an illusion. The very next morning, Layla, driven by fear for both her mistress and Josiah, made a fateful choice. She approached Mr. Graves in the stable yard. "Sir," she said, voice trembling, "I got something to tell you. Something bad." Graves narrowed his eyes. "Out with it, girl." Layla swallowed hard. "It's the mistress and Josiah." The overseer's face darkened like a storm cloud. He dismissed Layla with a curt nod, but his mind was already turning. That same afternoon, as Josiah worked at the forge, Graves watched him with cold calculation. And up at the big house, Eleanor sat at her window, unaware that the fragile world she and Josiah had built was about to come crashing down. Secrets, once whispered in moonlight, were now carried on the wind, and the wind at Willow Creek was shifting. August brought no relief from the heat, only a heavier stillness that seemed to press down on Willow Creek like an unseen hand. The tobacco leaves hung full and green, waiting for the harvest, but tension rippled through the plantation like heat rising from the fields. Mr. Harlan Graves had always prided himself on keeping order. A former army man with a scarred cheek and a voice like gravel, he believed firmness was mercy. Spare the rod, and the whole place would fall to ruin. When Layla whispered her terrible secret to him that morning in the stable yard, his blood ran hot with righteous anger, not for any moral outrage, but because such things threatened the natural order he enforced. He spent the day watching. He saw Josiah at the forge, hammering iron with steady rhythm, sweat glistening on his bare back. He saw Eleanor on the veranda, her gaze drifting too often toward the smithy. And he saw the way young Thomas paced the porch, letters from Richmond clutched in his fist. By evening, Graves had made his decision. He would not act rashly. No, he would gather proof and present it to Master Thomas. The boy might be soft from city life, but he was still a Hargrove. Blood would tell. That same night, Eleanor and Josiah had planned to meet at the old cabin once more. The pull between them had grown unbearable. A single day apart felt like punishment. Eleanor waited until the house was silent, then slipped out with a shawl over her shoulders, her heart pounding with equal parts fear and longing. Josiah arrived first, lighting a small candle stub inside the cabin to chase away the dark. When Eleanor entered, he pulled her close without a word. They clung to each other as though the world outside might tear them apart at any moment, which, unknown to them, it very nearly would. "I've been thinking," Eleanor whispered against his neck. "There might be a way. A friend in Richmond knows a sea captain who sometimes helps people north. If we could save enough." Josiah silenced her with a gentle finger to her lips. "Don't speak of it yet. Dreams like that can kill a man if they don't come true. Let me just hold you tonight." They lay together on the old blankets, speaking softly of small things, of the way fireflies looked like stars fallen to earth, of the river's song at dawn. For a few precious hours, the cabin became their whole world. But outside, shadows moved. Graves had followed Josiah at a distance, keeping to the tree line. When he saw the faint glow from the cabin window and heard muffled voices, he crept closer. Peering through a crack in the weathered boards, his eyes confirmed what Layla had claimed. Rage and triumph warred within him. He did not burst in. Instead, he retreated silently and made for the big house. Thomas was still awake, nursing a glass of bourbon in the study, worry etched on his young face. "Young master," Graves said, knocking once before entering. "We got trouble. Bad trouble." Thomas looked up irritably. "What now, Graves?" The overseer leaned in, voice low. "It's your mother, sir. She's compromised herself with that blacksmith, Josiah." Thomas stared, the glass pausing halfway to his lips. "What are you saying?" "I saw him with my own eyes. In the old cabin down by the south field. Been going on for weeks, from what Layla says." Thomas set the glass down hard, color draining from his face. "Layla told you this?" "Yes, sir. Out of loyalty," she said. "Afraid for the mistress's reputation, and for the boy if word got out." Thomas stood abruptly, chair scraping back. For a long moment he said nothing, his mind racing. His mother, his dignified, grieving mother, in the arms of a slave? The shame of it burned. And yet, a colder thought crept in. If scandal touched Willow Creek, creditors in Richmond would close in faster. The plantation might be lost. "Show me," he said finally, voice tight. Graves nodded grimly. The two men took lanterns and rode down the path on horseback, arriving at the cabin just as the candle inside guttered low. Thomas dismounted first, heart hammering. He approached the door and flung it open without warning. The scene inside froze every soul. Eleanor sat up with a gasp, clutching the blanket to her chest, her hair loose and wild. Josiah sprang to his feet, instinctively stepping in front of her, his eyes wide with dread. For an endless moment, no one spoke. Then Thomas's voice cracked like a whip. "Mother!" Eleanor's face crumbled. "Thomas, please." "You!" Thomas spat at Josiah, drawing the pistol he always carried since his father's death. "Step away from her." Josiah raised his hand slowly, never taking his eyes from the barrel. "Master Thomas, I mean no harm." "You've done harm enough," Thomas shouted. Graves stood behind him, hand on his own whip. Eleanor found her voice. "Thomas, lower the gun. This is my doing, not his. Punish me if you must, but spare him." "Spare him?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "He's property, Mother. Property that's forgotten its place. And you—" His voice broke. "How could you disgrace Father's memory like this?" Tears streamed down Eleanor's cheeks. "I loved your father, but I am not dead, Thomas. I am alive, and I have been so lonely." Graves stepped forward. "Begging your pardon, sir, but we can't let this stand. Word gets out, every planter in the county will shun us. And the law, miscegenation's a crime." Thomas's hand trembled on the pistol. Part of him wanted to shoot Josiah where he stood. Another part, the part raised on his mother's gentle stories, wavered. Finally, he lowered the weapon, though his eyes blazed. "Bind him," he ordered Graves. "Take him to the barn. We'll deal with this at dawn." Graves moved swiftly, looping rope around Josiah's wrist despite Eleanor's cries. Josiah did not resist. He only looked at Eleanor with steady sorrow. "I love you," he said simply as they dragged him out. Eleanor tried to follow, but Thomas caught her arm. "You will stay in the house. You will not leave your room until I say." "Thomas, please, he's done nothing but love me." "Love?" Thomas hissed. "He's a slave, Mother. Whatever you feel, it's delusion. Tomorrow he'll be sold south. That's mercy." Eleanor collapsed to her knees in the dirt outside the cabin, sobbing as they led Josiah away. The night swallowed his silhouette, and with it, her heart. Back in the big house, Thomas locked her door himself. He posted a trusted house servant outside with orders that no one was to enter or leave. Dawn found Eleanor pale and hollow-eyed at her window, watching as Graves and two field hands marched Josiah toward the wagon already hitched for market day in Richmond. Josiah's hands were bound, his head high despite the bruises blooming on his face from Grace's lesson in the barn. Eleanor pounded on the glass, screaming his name, but the sound did not carry far enough. As the wagon rolled down the long drive beneath the willows, Josiah turned once to look back at the mansion. Even from that distance, Eleanor felt their eyes meet one final time. Then he was gone. Thomas stood on the veranda, watching until the dust settled. His face was stone, but inside, doubt gnawed. He had saved the plantation's reputation at terrible cost. What he did not yet know was that the deepest cost had only begun to grow, hidden and secret, within his mother's womb. The storm had broken over Willow Creek, but the flood was yet to come. Autumn crept over Willow Creek like a cautious thief, painting the tobacco fields gold and crimson before the harvest hands stripped them bare. The great house stood quieter than it had in years. Servants moved on soft feet. Conversations hushed the moment Mistress Eleanor entered a room. Thomas had declared the events of that August night closed, never to be spoken of again, and the plantation bent to his will. Eleanor remained confined to her chambers for nearly 3 weeks after Josiah's sale. Thomas brought her meals himself at first, his face a mask of stern disappointment. He spoke little, only reminding her of duty, of the Hargrove name, of the ruin she had nearly brought upon them all. When she tried to plead for news of Josiah, where he had been taken, whether he still lived, Thomas turned away without answer. "He is gone," he said finally, voice flat. "That is all you need to know." In time, the lock on her door was removed, but the invisible chains remained. Eleanor walked the veranda at dusk, gazing down the long drive as though willing the wagon to return. She ate sparingly, grew pale, and spent hours at her writing desk composing letters she never sent, pages filled with apologies, love, and desperate hopes that somehow reached Josiah across the miles. Layla, racked with guilt for her part in the betrayal, tended her mistress with extra gentleness. She brushed Eleanor's hair each night, laid out fresh linens, and left small comforts. A sprig of lavender on the pillow, a cup of chamomile tea. Eleanor noticed the girl's red-rimmed eyes and one evening reached for her hand. "You told them, didn't you?" she asked quietly. Layla froze, tears spilling instantly. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I was scared. Scared for you both. I thought if Mr. Graves knew, he could stop it before something worse happened." Eleanor pulled the girl into an embrace. "Hush now. I do not blame you. Fear rules us all here." From that night, a fragile trust grew between mistress and maid. Layla became Eleanor's quiet ally, carrying discreet inquiries to Mama Ruth in the quarters and bringing back what little news there was. Josiah had been sold to a cotton planter in Mississippi, a hard place known for breaking strong men. No more was known. As September gave way to October, Eleanor began to notice changes in her body. At first she dismissed the fatigue, the tender breasts, the missed courses as effects of grief. But when November brought no relief and a secret visit to an old midwife in the quarters confirmed her suspicion, the truth settled over her like a shroud. She was with child. The realization brought both terror and a fierce, protective joy. This child, Josiah's child, was all that remained of their love. In a world that would brand it abomination, she already loved it with a depth that astonished her. She kept the secret closely guarded, wearing looser gowns, blaming her pallor on lingering sorrow. Thomas, preoccupied with harvest tallies and negotiations to refinance his debts, noticed little beyond her continued quiet obedience. Winter approached, bringing crisp air and bare branches that clawed at the sky. Eleanor spent long hours in the library, poring over ledgers and law books her husband had collected. She read of manumission, of trusts, of ways a woman of property might protect what was hers. Ideas formed slowly, like frost on a windowpane. One December evening, as firelight danced across the parlor walls, she summoned Thomas. He entered warily, sensing the shift in her demeanor. For months she had been submissive. Now her eyes held steady purpose. "Thomas," she began, voice calm, "we must speak of the future of Willow Creek." He sat, guarded. "I am managing it well enough, Mother. Are you?" She slid a folded letter across the table, another demand from a Richmond creditor. "Your gambling has endangered everything your father built. I have been silent out of shame, but no longer." Thomas flushed. "How did you?" "I have eyes everywhere, even from my rooms." She leaned forward. "But I am prepared to help you settle these debts on one condition." He narrowed his eyes. "What condition?" "That you sign over legal control of the plantation to me. Fully. In writing. I will manage the finances, the crops, the sales. You may remain as heir, but day-to-day authority will be mine." Thomas laughed incredulously. "A woman running a plantation? The neighbors would." "The neighbors already whisper about your losses in town," she cut in sharply. "Better they speak of an eccentric widow than a bankrupt heir." "I have studied the books, Thomas. I know the land, the people, the markets. Your father taught me more than you realize." They argued late into the night. Thomas stormed, threatened, cajoled. But Eleanor held firm, reminding him quietly of the scandal she could still unleash if pushed, the truth of why Josiah was sold so hastily. In the end, desperation won. 2 days later, in the presence of a discreet attorney from town, Thomas signed the papers transferring management to his mother. He retained ownership in name, but Eleanor now held the reins. With power came possibility. She began small reforms. Better rations in the quarters, a day of rest after harvest, permission for Mama Ruth to plant a larger kitchen garden. Whispers spread that the mistress had changed, grown harder in some ways, kinder in others. Layla, now fully devoted, helped conceal the pregnancy as it advanced. Loose shawls, strategic illnesses, excuses of mourning seclusion. By February 1853, Eleanor's condition could no longer be hidden from the sharpest eyes, but she controlled the story. She announced to Thomas and the household that, in her grief, she had accepted the quiet courtship of a widowed planter from a neighboring county, a man who visited briefly and discreetly before returning north on business. The child, she claimed, was legitimate, though the father had tragically passed in a steamboat accident. Thomas, suspicious but unwilling to probe a tale that preserved appearances, accepted it publicly. Privately, he drank more and spent longer hours in Richmond. As spring returned, greening the fields once more, Eleanor prepared in secret. She chose a trusted midwife from the quarters, an older woman named Aunt Hester who had delivered countless babies in silence. Plans were laid for a quiet birth in the mistress's chambers, away from prying eyes. On a warm night in April 1853, as dogwood blossoms drifted like snow outside the window, Eleanor's pains began. Layla and Aunt Hester tended her through the long hours, wiping her brow, whispering encouragement. Thomas was away in town, a deliberate arrangement. At dawn, a son cried his first breath. He was perfect, tiny fists waving, skin a warm café au lait, eyes dark like his father's. Eleanor held him close, tears streaming as she whispered the name she had carried in her heart for months. "Josiah," she murmured. "Your name is Josiah Nathaniel Hargrove." In the eyes of the world, he would be called Nathaniel, after her late husband, a fiction to shield him, but in her soul, and one day in his own, he would know the truth. As mother and child rested, Eleanor gazed out at the rising sun gilding the willows. The plantation stretched before her, no longer just land and legacy, but a trust. She would protect this boy with every resource at her command. She would teach him strength, resilience, and the hidden history of his blood. But secrets, even fiercely guarded, have a way of rooting deep and pushing toward light. And across the miles in Mississippi, the man whose blood ran in this child's veins still drew breath, scarred, weary, but unbroken, dreaming sometimes of a woman with stormy eyes who had once made him feel free. The silent months had passed, but the story of Willow Creek was far from over. Years slipped by at Willow Creek like pages turning in a well-worn book. The plantation prospered under Eleanor's steady hand. Tobacco yields rose, debts were quietly paid, and neighboring planters spoke with reluctant admiration of the widow Hargrove's gift for management. The great house gleamed with fresh paint, the fields stretched green and orderly, and life appeared, to outward eyes, serene. Young Nathaniel, called Nabe by those who loved him, grew swift and strong. By 1860 he was 7 years old, a bright, curious boy with thick dark curls, skin the warm shade of river clay after rain, and eyes that held the same quiet depth his father had possessed. He ran barefoot through the gardens in summer, climbed the willows with the stable boys, and sat at his mother's knee each evening while she read to him from Shakespeare or Walter Scott. Eleanor taught him numbers, letters, and history in the privacy of her sitting room, determined that no part of his mind should be left untended. To the world, Nate was the legitimate son of Eleanor's brief, tragic second marriage. Thomas, now 30 and often away in Richmond or Charleston pursuing business and pleasure, accepted the fiction with cool indifference. He had no warmth for the boy. Nate's coloring was explained away as inheritance from a supposed Mediterranean ancestor on the fictional husband's side. But neither did he challenge it openly. The plantation was thriving, his allowance generous, and scandal remained buried. That was enough. Yet shadows lingered. Mama Ruth, now frail and silver-haired, watched Nate from the quarters with tears she hid from others. She saw Josiah in every line of his face, every gentle gesture. On quiet evenings she told him stories of a brave man far away who forged strong iron and carried kindness in his heart. Nate listened wide-eyed, sensing without words that these tales were somehow about him. Layla, grown into a poised young woman of 24, remained Eleanor's closest companion. She managed the household with grace and guarded its secrets fiercely. When visitors came, she ensured Nate was presented impeccably, hair combed, manners perfect, yet always ready to whisk him away if curious glances lingered too long on his features. As the nation tore itself apart in the late 1850s, John Brown's raid, heated debates in Congress, whispers of secession reaching even Virginia drawing rooms, Eleanor felt the ground shifting beneath her carefully built life. She read newspapers avidly, corresponded with abolitionist-leaning friends in the North under assumed names, and quietly aided a few runaways who passed through on the Underground Railroad, guided by trusted hands in the quarters. Nate, sensing his mother's tension, began to ask questions no child should need to ask. "Mama," he said one spring evening in 1861, perched on the veranda steps as fireflies winked in the dusk, "why do some folks say I don't look like Papa's pictures?" Eleanor's breath caught. She had prepared for this moment, yet the ache was fresh. "Because you take after my side of the family, darling. And because people sometimes see what they expect to see, not what is true." He considered this, small brow furrowed. "But Billy at the stable says his papa looks just like him. Will I ever meet my papa?" She drew him close, kissing the top of his curly head. "Your papa loved you very much, even before you were born. He wanted you to be brave and kind. That is what matters most." Nate nodded solemnly, accepting for now. But the questions planted seeds. In April 1861, when Fort Sumter fell and Virginia seceded, Thomas returned home full of martial fervor. He joined the Confederate cavalry, eager for glory, leaving Eleanor in full command. War brought hardship, shortages, inflated prices, wounded soldiers quartered in neighboring homes. But Willow Creek endured. Eleanor sold cotton stores wisely, planted corn and vegetables for sustenance, and kept her people fed better than most plantations. Nate, now 8, watched the world change with solemn eyes. He saw uniformed men ride through, heard distant cannon practice, and helped his mother roll bandages for the soldiers. Yet in quiet moments he still asked about the brave man far away. One humid night in the summer of 1863, word came that changed everything. A ragged traveler, a freedman who had escaped from Mississippi after Union forces swept through, arrived at the quarters seeking rest before continuing north. Mama Ruth, ever hospitable, gave him cornbread and a pallet in her cabin. In gratitude, he shared news from the cotton plantations along the river. "I knew a blacksmith named Josiah once," he told her softly when others slept. "Strong man, Virginia born. Belonged to a cruel master near Vicksburg. Worked him near to death, but he never broke. When the bluecoats came, he guided them through the swamps, knew every path. Fought brave, too. Took a ball in the leg at Champion Hill, but lived. Last I heard, he'd gone north with the army. Calls himself a free man now." Mama Ruth's hands trembled as she pressed them to her mouth. Tears fell silently. The next morning she sought Eleanor in the garden, voice shaking as she relayed the story. Eleanor stood frozen among the roses, hope and fear warring in her chest. Josiah, alive, free, after all these years. She dared not believe fully, yet her heart soared. That night she wrote a careful letter, addressed to a Quaker contact in Ohio who aided contraband camps behind Union lines. She described Josiah, gave the few details she knew, and signed it only, "A Virginia friend." She enclosed a small sum for his care if found. Months passed with no reply. The war ground on. Gettysburg, Vicksburg fallen, Richmond besieged. Thomas returned once on leave, thinner and harder, speaking bitterly of Yankee atrocities. He barely glanced at Nate, who hid behind Eleanor's skirts. In the spring of 1865, as dogwoods bloomed once more, two events converged to shatter the fragile peace Eleanor had built. First, a letter arrived, forwarded through winding channels, from a Union hospital in Washington City. The handwriting was careful, labored, as though from a man unused to pen and ink. My dearest Eleanor, if this reaches you, know that I live. I have thought of you every day these long years. The Lord saw fit to free me, though the cost was high. I search now for my mother and for the woman who holds my heart. If you read this, send word. I remain. Your Josiah. Eleanor wept over the page until it blurred. She kissed the signature, pressed it to her breast. He lived. He remembered. He forgave. But joy was short-lived. Days later, a Confederate deserter, half-starved and desperate, stumbled onto the plantation seeking food. In his delirium he babbled to the field hands about a cavalry officer named Hargrove who had fallen at Appomattox Station just weeks before Lee's surrender. Thomas was dead. Eleanor mourned her son with complicated grief, love for the boy he had been, sorrow for the man he became, regret for the chasm between them. With his death, full ownership of Willow Creek passed to her, and upon her death, to young Nate. The war ended in April. Union troops occupied Richmond. Freed people across the South began the long search for scattered families. In June, on a golden afternoon thick with the scent of honeysuckle, a traveler walked up the long Willow Line drive. He was tall still, though he leaned on a crude crutch, his left leg stiff from an old wound. His hair was touched with gray, his face lined by hardship. But his eyes, those deep, steady eyes, were unchanged. Nate, playing with a wooden horse in the yard, looked up first. Something in the man's gaze drew him like a magnet. He stood slowly, staring. Eleanor emerged from the house at the sound of Layla's joyful cry. She stopped on the veranda steps, hand pressed to her heart. Josiah. He removed his worn hat, standing humble yet proud in the dust of the drive. "Ma'am," he said softly, voice rough with emotion, "I come looking for my family." Eleanor flew down the steps, heedless of propriety, and into his arms. They clung together as though the lost decade had never been, tears mingling on their cheeks. Nate approached shyly. Josiah knelt with difficulty, meeting the boy eye to eye. "And who might you be, young sir?" he asked gently, though wonder already lit his face. "I'm Nathaniel Hargrove," the boy answered. Then, with childlike certainty, "But Mama calls me Josiah when no one's listening." Josiah's breath caught. He looked up at Eleanor, eyes shining with understanding and awe. This is our son." She nodded, unable to speak. Josiah opened his arms, and Nate stepped into them without hesitation. Father and son held each other for the first time, while Mama Ruth watched from the quarter's edge, hands raised in silent thanksgiving. The shadows of truth had lengthened across Willow Creek for 13 years. Now, in the bright Virginia sun, they began to lift. But one final reckoning awaited. The summer of 1865 lingered long and golden over Virginia, as though the land itself were healing from the wounds of war. Union soldiers patrolled the roads, freed people gathered in joyful reunions or sorrowful searches, and the old certainties crumbled like dry earth underfoot. At Willow Creek Plantation, change came not with thunder, but with quiet, steady footsteps. Josiah stayed. In the first weeks he slept in a small room off the stables, uncertain of his place. He was a free man now, papers in his pocket to prove it, yet the habits of a lifetime, eyes lowered, voice soft, steps measured, did not vanish overnight. Eleanor watched him with aching tenderness, giving him space to breathe, to decide. Nate, however, decided for all of them. The boy shadowed his father everywhere, to the forge where Josiah coaxed life back into the old bellows, to the fields where he walked the rows speaking to former hands now paid wages, to the creek where they skipped stones and fished with bent pins. Nate's laughter rang through the yard as it never had before, bright and unafraid. He called Josiah Papa within days, the word slipping out naturally, as though it had always belonged there. One evening in early autumn, as the sun dipped low and painted the river crimson, Eleanor found Josiah on the veranda steps, whittling a small wooden horse for Nate. "You could have a room in the big house," she said softly, sitting beside him. "There is space. You belong here, with us." Josiah paused, knife still in the air. "I know you mean it kind, Eleanor, but folks comin' by. Neighbors, soldiers, the new agents from the Freedman's Bureau. They'd talk. I won't bring shame on you or the boy." She took his rough hand in hers. "The shame belongs to a world that made us hide, not to us. Stay, Josiah. Marry me, if the law will allow it now. Let us build the life we were denied." His eyes searched hers, wonder and caution mingling. "You'd marry a man who was once your property?" "I would marry the man who carried me through a storm, who loved me when it could have cost him everything, who gave me the greatest gift of my life." She glanced toward the garden where Nate chased fireflies with Layla's young niece. "We have lost too many years already." In November 1865, with the leaves turning flame and gold, they stood before a freedman's bureau officer in the county seat. Mama Ruth, frail but beaming, stood witness alongside Layla and Aunt Hester. Josiah and Eleanor spoke simple vows beneath a plain roof, no grand gown or flowers, yet the moment shone brighter than any society wedding. They returned to Willow Creek as husband and wife. The neighbors did talk, of course they did. Some cut Eleanor dead at the county market. Others came curious, then stayed for her sharp business sense and quiet dignity. But the war had broken old rules, and new ones were still being written. Slowly, invitations returned, not many, but enough. Josiah took his place beside Eleanor in managing the plantation. He trained young men in the forge, teaching skills that could carry them into freedom. Wages were paid fairly, shares offered to those who wished to stay and farm the land. Willow Creek became a place where black and white worked side by side, not always easily, but with growing respect. Nate thrived. At 10 he read fluently, helped his father at the forge, and rode across the fields with a confidence that turned heads. Children from the quarters called him brother. He called them the same. Eleanor watched with fierce pride, knowing the world beyond the willows would not always be kind to a boy of mixed blood, yet determined to arm him with education, love, and truth. One spring day in 1870, when Nate was 17, the family gathered beneath the great willow by the creek, the same tree that had sheltered stolen kisses decades before. Josiah, gray now but strong, held Eleanor's hand. Mama Ruth had passed peacefully the year prior, buried beneath that very tree with a simple stone carved by her son. Nate stood tall before them, announcement in his eyes. "I've been accepted to the normal school in Richmond," he said, "to train as a teacher. I want to help others learn, children like the ones here who never had the chance." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears of joy. Josiah gripped his son's shoulder, pride shining. "You'll do good, son. Carry what we've given you, and make it grow." Years rolled onward. Nate became a respected educator, founding a school for black children in the county. He married a bright young teacher from Hampton, and their children, Josiah and Eleanor's grandchildren, played in the same gardens, dark curls bouncing in the Virginia sun. Willow Creek itself changed hands gently when Eleanor and Josiah grew old. They passed it to Nate and his wife, with shares divided among the families who had worked it for generations. The great house stood, but the quarters were replaced by neat cottages, the fields worked by free hands. Eleanor lived to see her 80th year, passing quietly one autumn morning in 1897 with Josiah at her side. He followed her 2 years later, laid to rest beside her and Mama Ruth beneath the willow. Their stone bore simple words. Together at last. Love endured. What happened next flowed like the James River itself, steady, enduring, reshaping the land. Descendants of Josiah and Eleanor still farm parts of the old Willow Creek land today. Some bear the Hargrove name, others the one Josiah took in freedom. Freeman. Family reunions gather beneath that same ancient willow, now vast and sheltering, where stories are told of a widow who dared to love across every line society drew, of a man who carried that love through chains and war, and of the bloodline they forged, one rooted not in ownership, but in courage, sacrifice, and unbreakable devotion. The mansion stands as a quiet museum now, open to those who wish to remember that even in the darkest soil, love can take root, bloom against all odds, and rewrite everything that comes after. And on warm evenings, when the cicadas sing and fireflies dance above the creek, visitors sometimes swear they glimpse two figures walking hand in hand beneath the willows. A woman in a simple dress, a tall man with a gentle smile, watching over the legacy they built together at last.